Hey everyone, it's Jedi Bunny, otherwise known as Kelly, and today I'm talking with you about something really special, which is why I love David Lynch as a director, and why I also love him as a person. I really admire him, and I just think he's an awesome human being altogether and a wonderful artist. He is truly tapped into something different, and I think that really shows not only in his work but also in a lot of his fan base. I think he has a very different fan base compared to a lot of other works of art and cinema and directors. A lot of you have also expressed that you're interested in David Lynch, you love a lot of his work, so I think there will be some commonality here and some interesting things to delve into together and kind of work out. How I really started getting into David Lynch was I was looking up a bunch of video game reviews and talking about, I was getting really into horror manga and also horror video games at the same time. And people kept talking about Uncanny Valley. So finally I started looking into Uncanny Valley. And there was one particular video, I wish I could remember what these were, but this was a few years ago now, several years ago now. And one person in particular kept bringing up David Lynch, specifically Twin Peaks, and the use of Uncanny Valley theory in the execution of that show. So I decided, you know what, Twin Peaks is on Netflix, I'm gonna watch it, and I ended up binge watching the entire first season, probably within about a week, 2 weeks maybe, and absolutely loved it. But anyway, I'll get more into that later. I also want to touch upon how David Lynch uses a lot of Lovecraftian horror themes in his work. And he also really touches upon the inevitability of death, the illusion of life, and something what I call is life is decay. So in other words, almost a Schrodinger's cat effect of life and death are the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. And if we try to separate them, that's where true anxiety, I believe, comes from, at least when referring to David Lynch's work. He's just so not Hollywood.
Now, I would like to nominate for the Ice Bucket Challenge, Vladimir Putin.
I just do not associate David Lynch with Hollywood. I find him incredibly refreshing, both as a director and a person within Hollywood, and I don't typically even consider him Hollywood. I feel that quite often he's overlooked when it comes to awards. I think a lot of critics absolutely adore Lynch, but I also think the general public, his work isn't quite as palatable to them, so it's not going to be as well received. One more thing is that he is an INFP as defined by the Myers-Briggs personality test, at least that's what's been reported widely on the internet, and I am also an INFP, so you know, I always appreciate my fellow INFPs. If you don't know what that is, I did a quick video on that a couple weeks ago about how the Myers-Briggs test is very relevant to me, and I think it's super cool. But a quick breakdown is INFP means introverted, intuitive, feeling, and perceiving person. So David Lynch fits all of those categories pretty well from what we see exhibited in interviews, biographical accounts of his work, autobiographical accounts of his work, and just through observing his work. There's something about David Lynch's work that really pulls me in. I personally love things that feel grounded in reality of some sort and that follow a set of rules that are set up probably within the first act and a half of any film. I find this a really good way of grounding the viewer and giving us a lens through which to perceive whatever art it is that we're viewing. And I feel that David Lynch he has so much flexibility in this realm that I don't see other directors as having, because he sets us up with a really fun, playful sense of this is not reality as we know it, but at the other side of that is it almost feels more true to the human experience, because we are not linear beings as much as I think we like to think that we are. we are in so many different states at once. We are constantly in flux. Our imaginations are continually running, and there is always something going on within the human mind that isn't grounded in reality. And I feel that more than any other director that I've seen, Lynch captures this. And there's something that I totally forgot to mention that has more to do with Lynch himself. I don't personally perceive him to have any level of pretentiousness in his work. I don't find him to be a snobbish film director. I don't find him to be pretentious at all. I find him to be so truly authentic to himself, his work, and what he wants to create. And he's never talking down to his audience, and he's never talking above his audience, which I think is brilliant. So when you watch David Lynch's work, one of the things that you will notice is that he really deals a lot with cause and effect, action and reaction, particularly when it comes to his characters. We'll see someone do something, we'll think that maybe that has no effect on their world because we might not see it right away, but it will come back later. This isn't necessarily true for all of his work, but one thing I can think of in particular is Twin Peaks: The Return, which I believe was aired on Showtime a few years ago, and that was one of my favorite sequels to any series ever. It was just amazing, but I think he does a really excellent job of setting things up that we might not think have any connectivity to any other plot point or any other character, but as we watch things unfold, we realize how connected everything is within that world, within that universe, within the characters. Even if characters have never met each other and they're in completely different hemispheres, there's a thread holding everyone and everything together. It's fascinating the way Lynch does this, and I think with most films that I've seen try to do this, with most directors that I've seen try to create this level of interconnectivity between its events and its characters, it can come off as tropish and really just unsubtle, kind of in your face, kind of annoying, pulling at your heartstrings a little bit. Some directors do it beautifully. One that comes to mind is Terrence Malick. The Tree of Life, for example, I think does a really good job with this, but there's something about Lynch's way of doing it that feels very authentic to the human experience and how we perceive reality as it is. I also really love how Lynch delves into the juxtaposition between beauty and chaos, and also the connection between beauty and chaos. This is something that I personally, I don't want to say I struggle with it, but I notice it. And I feel as though I'm constantly in a fluid state of feeling that life and everything in it is beautiful and meaningful and precious and special. And on the other side, feeling that everything is horrifying and traumatizing and anxiety riddled. And Lynch creates work that shows this so beautifully, and he ties the most beautiful things together with the ugliest, most horrible things. Typically, the horrible things that David Lynch is highlighting are human behavior and human action, how we traumatize each other, how we traumatize ourselves. So, for example, the character of Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet, he's seen as the antagonist, and he's incredibly violent. Spoiler alert, but he's incredibly violent to his love interest. And by no means is he relatable or empathetic. But David Lynch does a really good job of also showing us a vulnerability and this strange childlike quality that Dennis Hopper has, where it's almost as though he's psychologically giving us the underpinnings to understand that this character is acting out of a void that he has, where perhaps he never had that love growing up, or etc. And for those of you who know me, you know that I am a sucker for understanding why people behave the way we do, why we act the way we do, why we hurt people, why we hurt ourselves. And I think Lynch does a wonderful job of showing us this without telling us in an expositional way. And that's another thing I love about Lynch, that so many directors, gotta love them, but it's so easy for directors to have exposition in their work, and that's one thing that David Lynch just does not settle for. He will not have exposition in any of his work. He does not feel that he wants to or needs to explain anything to his audience. He would rather his audience have questions left at the end than give us all the answers. And As a huge fan of film, I appreciate and respect that so much when a director is willing to make that choice, because it is hard and you are going to cut off a significant amount of your audience within the general population if you do have confusing work that you're not explaining to your audience. But I think it's a wonderful choice in Lynch's work, so absolutely love that. Lynch also really focuses on, under the same umbrella as his use of beauty versus chaos, he also focuses a lot on nature and electricity. You can tell Lynch really has an eye for nature. Blue skies, sunshine.
Blue skies, a lot of golden sunshine.
Different types of animals, trees, plant life. He really loves watching and observing nature through his lens. Additionally, which I think is at the other side of the coin but is also related to this, is electricity. You'll notice a lot of Lynch focusing on electrical buzzing, electrical systems, power systems. He'll quite often zoom in on power outlets, power lines. He'll zoom in and you'll hear the electricity. It's gotten to the point where I'm so conditioned to noticing that in Lynch's work that I can't walk by a power line without thinking of David Lynch. And I can't hear electrical buzzing without thinking of David Lynch, even just a light. And I'm super sensitive to really high-pitched sounds, so I'll hear a light buzzing even from my computer screen and I'll know I have to turn the brightness down or up because I can hear the electrical buzzing. So Lynch is definitely really clued into that, and it's super cool to see because it's a really different thing that he does that I think we see and notice in everyday life, but we don't always have directors and artists that bring that to the forefront and make us remember, oh yeah, this is constantly buzzing around us, this electricity. It's a conduit for nature itself. So it's a really interesting, perplexing thing to kind of think about, and David Lynch does a great job of not saying anything about it and not telling us anything about it, but just showing us and reminding us, hey, electricity is buzzing all around us, and what does that mean? Moving on to David Lynch's use of existential dread and horror. David Lynch uses a principle called uncanny valley quite often. Now, the definition of uncanny valley, in my opinion, isn't as fleshed out as it could be. I think it's really been adapted over time. It used to be particularly defined by something like an android-human relationship. Hi, Nova. Now, as I see it, uncanny valley can be represented as just a feeling of unease, as though something's off but you can't quite put your finger on it. Lynch is superb at evoking this feeling where everything looks normal but something feels off. And the way he does this is often very, very subtle. It can be through his use of different camera angles, shots, takes, or even just choices that the characters are making that seem a little bit off with who they are or how they've been represented thus far. I'd like to actually quote H.P. Lovecraft a few times using these examples here. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is the fear of the unknown. Another quote, which is actually one of my favorite quotes ever, is also by H.P. Lovecraft. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. This quote is just so, it just resonates so deeply with me. Particularly the part of the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. So what this means for me, and what I think this means for David Lynch's work, is that it really taps into that feeling of existential dread or existential anxiety, where we might feel like everything's going fine, everything's going okay, but there's this underlying feeling that something's off, something's wrong. And I think that might be kind of what brings us into our next point that deals with primal fear. But more importantly, I think what it really taps into is, as humans, we have an awareness that death is inevitable. Life oftentimes feels like an illusion, and it's very hard for us to orient ourselves in a way that feels objectively real, and to be able to perceive reality as it truly is. and also that life is decay, and that life and death are two sides of the same coin. Most importantly, it's the duality of existence. And I think most directors show us work from the angle that everything is kind of as you're shown. You trust the reality that you're shown, you trust the reality that you're given. Whereas with Lynch, there's really never a reliable reality to look at. There's always a sense of flux, and there's always a sense that there's something in an undercurrent going on beneath the surface. A great example is the opening of Blue Velvet, where we have these beautiful shots of blue skies, white clouds, sunshine, beautiful houses with picket fences in a small town suburbia, but underneath the grass on this beautifully manicured lawn is just all of these beetles and insects, what looks to be decay, and Lynch just does such a good job of exhibiting this sense of there's always something else going on, whether that's in the objective reality of the world, whether that's in the reality of the character or set of people going on, etc. David Lynch as a person. Now, this is my favorite part of who David Lynch is. Aside from his direction, aside from his works of art, his carpentry skills, his painting skills, he's awesome in so many different ways. But my favorite thing about David Lynch is just who he is as a person, from what I've seen in interviews, documentaries, other things, etc., from what I've read.
Nature is a guide to, making, everything. Like there's slow areas and there's fast areas. Like blank wall is the slow area. I always talk about this duck. The proportions of a duck are all, working, and the textures are all working in a certain way. They got big feathers on the body, and you can't put big feathers on the head. It would be completely wrong. They got to be little bitty feathers there. And the bill has got to be a certain length, and the bill relates to the feet in some of the texture and coloring. And then the feathers curve down in this S-curve into a huge big body with a soft, it's slow area. And the eye of the duck is the fastest area and can only be put right there, like a little gleaming jewel. It couldn't be stuck in the body, it would get lost. And it couldn't be stuck on the leg, it'd be two speedy things next to each other. And, it'd just be a joke.
He just doesn't seem to have that sense where he needs the recognition and the notoriety. He just enjoys creating art. That's what really is his bread and butter, is just creating art from the ground up. And it's absolutely beautiful to see. He seems like he's created a life for himself where he's able to be truly authentic to himself and his art, which I think we all strive for. Ideally, I think that's what most of us probably want, is just to live an authentic life where we're true to ourselves and true to what we want to create in this world. He's also learned to be curious about and to embrace his hangups and trauma, and he actually uses those things in his work. Whereas I think a lot of us, including myself, I'm often overwhelmed by and self-judging over a lot of the things that I've faced in life that haven't been so positive. Whereas someone like Lynch actually uses those things to his benefit to create art, and he explores his fears, his trauma, bad experiences that have happened to him. He explores that all through his art in a really meaningful way. So an example that I have is his conception of Blue Velvet. Now, a lot of the times I've noticed how David Lynch comes up with an idea is he'll have a single thought. Oftentimes it's a visual image. For example, how he came up with Blue Velvet was that image of the ear on the lawn. And I think that's what a lot of people might get wrong about David Lynch, understandably, is that they think he has a really dark mind where he's delving into all of these really dark subjects. But what I think it is that he's experienced a lot of these things and a lot of these existential questions, and he truly wants to understand the underpinning of reality and how we exist in it. Yeah, and I should make a small side note that Eraserhead, I've seen it once. I was completely impressed with it, but I don't think I ever personally want to see it again. It was just so much for me to take. There's, I think, a shirt out there that says I watched Eraserhead and I survived, or something, or I survived Eraserhead. I just think that's so funny. It's very true to my experience. I am a highly sensitive person, and especially when it comes to helpless beings like animals or babies or even the elderly, I get really, really sensitive when I see any kind of violence against them. So spoiler alert, but that's definitely, there's some involvement of some sort. I won't tell you what, but in Eraserhead. So that was a little much for me to take. Fun story, I actually found a baby squirrel last week, and it was at my apartment complex, and we have these little streams running through it, and this baby squirrel was crying, and I noticed it as I was walking away from my mailbox, and it just jumped into this stream. So I went and I grabbed it and I held it and I was petting it and warming it up, and I brought it up to my apartment, let Nova meet it. This doesn't have a happy ending, by the way, spoiler alert. Don't worry, Nova didn't do anything. She was actually really good. Nova's really good with other animals. She loves other animals. I've brought several baby animals home, and she's always been fine. But I was petting this baby squirrel. I made a formula for him. I kept his electrolytes up. He even ate a little bit. Dried him off, got rid of, he had a bunch of fleas, and I made like a flea bath for him. Unfortunately, I did have hand warmers for the night, but they didn't stay warm because they're like 6 years old. So those didn't stay warm, and overnight he went into I believe it was hypoglycemia. So by the time I got to him in the morning, he really wasn't doing well. So he didn't make it. And that just reminded me a little bit of Eraserhead. It's totally different, but it's kind of similar. So you guys can kind of get the picture. There's a great little, I kind of want to call it a documentary. It's on YouTube. You can watch it for free, and it's all about David Lynch. And there's one story in which one of his friends is talking about a time he and David Lynch were painting together, and a moth actually flew into David Lynch's painting.
And one day he brought in a painting. It was of a dock or a wharf scene. It was kind of greens and blacks and stuff. And it was just like thick with oil. And he was showing it to me, and was pretty excited about it. And then this moth flew into the painting, and it got stuck in the thick oil paint. And it started like flapping around, and it made this big spiral, you know, this death of this moth. And I was thinking that he would take it off and then repaint it and stuff, but he fell in love with it. He said, "This is great," you know. And so from that day on, he started like putting little bugs and stuff in his paintings.
And I found that really cute and interesting. Okay, so that about wraps up all of my preliminary thoughts on David Lynch. I just wanted to kind of test the waters, see what you guys thought, and kind of do an exploration for David Lynch. For those of you that maybe aren't as familiar with his work, I figure we can go more in depth if you're interested in that. I also think it's a great way to start out the kind of fall time, because David Lynch, in my opinion, has some of the best viewing for around Halloween. It's not necessarily horror or scary stuff, but it definitely gets your mind going in that space of what do things mean? There's definitely something going on here, and just, I don't know, I find his work really exciting. My top recommendation for starting out with David Lynch would be either the first season of Twin Peaks, which was made in the 90s, or possibly Blue Velvet, or possibly Mulholland Drive if you're a little more adventurous. But Blue Velvet's probably one of his more straightforward films. There's also another film that he did that I absolutely love called The Straight Story, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's a little bit long, so if your attention span isn't too great, I wouldn't start with that one, but it's beautiful and it's excellent. It's ironically, it is probably the most straight story David Lynch has ever done. There's really nothing surreal in there. There's no strange twists or elements. It's just a beautiful story about a familial reunion, and I won't go any further than that because I don't want to give you guys spoilers. But yeah, that's David Lynch in a nutshell. If you are curious to know more about him, I really suggest just hopping on YouTube and searching more videos about him, because there's so many great things going on, so many great channels that delve into his work. I have here this book, and maybe I'll look and see if there are any quotes that I can read from it. So David Lynch on cinema. Cinema is a language. It can say things, big abstract things, and I love that about it. I'm not always good with words. Some people are poets and have a beautiful way of saying things with words, but cinema is its own language. And with it, you can say so many things, because you've got time and sequences, you've got dialogue, you've got music, you've got sound effects, you have so many tools, and you can express a feeling and a thought that can't be conveyed in any other way. It's a magical medium. For me, it's so beautiful to think about these pictures and sounds flowing together, in time and in sequence, making something that could be done only through cinema. This is a great one about the interpretation of Lynch's work that's really pertinent for digesting and understanding his work specifically. People sometimes say they have trouble understanding a film, but I think they understand much more than they realize because we're all blessed with intuition. We really have the gift of intuiting things. I love the trust that David Lynch puts in people and his audience. Cinema is a lot like music. It can be very abstract, but people have a yearning to make intellectual sense of it, to put it right into words. And when they can't do that, it feels frustrating. But they can come up with an explanation from within if they just allow it. That is so beautiful. What a cool director. It's so seldom that you find directors that don't want people to understand everything. It's, I think Charlie Kaufman comes to mind, Terrence Malick, Stanley Kubrick, David Fincher, Christopher Nolan. And I love all of those directors that I mentioned, but for this reason alone, I think David Lynch is my favorite, and that is that he has such a pure relationship with his work, and he isn't necessarily creating it for the audience just to enjoy or understand it or pick it apart and analyze it. He's creating it because it's something that he feels inside himself, and he needs to put it out into the world. And you can really tell the difference between people and artists that create from that sense of intrinsic motivation and creativity versus the people that want to put something out there to be recognized. And one isn't necessarily better than the other, but for me, that's why Lynch's work and his personality resonates so deeply with me. I also really encourage you to check out David Lynch's YouTube channel. I believe it's called David Lynch Theater, but it's clearly not just theater. He actually does a weather report every single day for Los Angeles County.
Here in LA, another thick gray fog rolled in. Very still right now. 63 degrees Fahrenheit, around 17 Celsius. Today, I'm thinking about the fact that my coffee machine broke down. Should get up to around 83 degrees Fahrenheit this afternoon, 27 Celsius. And once this fog burns away, per usual, we should be enjoying those beautiful blue skies and golden sunshine. Everyone, have a great day.
And it's just super cool. He loves the weather. He's been fascinated with it since he was young, and it's just a really sweet way. And it's pertinent to me because I live in the area, and I also tend to go hiking around the area that he's reporting on, so it's super cool. I also wanted to give him an honorable mention to Stanley Kubrick, who is my second favorite director. I think Stanley Kubrick is absolutely phenomenal. I absolutely love The Shining, and especially 2001: A Space Odyssey. I love a lot of his work, and I do think there are some similarities between them. Lynch has definitely mentioned in the past that he really admires Kubrick, and Kubrick has had some inspiration on Lynch's work, and I think that's super cool. I also think it's fascinating to think about how they do have some similar styles structurally. Even some of their shots and choices in camera work have been similar. Sound design and even scoring of their films, but they're just such different people. So for example, Lynch is known in the industry to be one of the best directors to work with. He's supposed to be fun, energetic, exciting, authentic, kind, and just very different. People that have worked with him have reported that it's like being with a family when they're on set, and I just think that's so cool. I love hearing about actors' experiences, especially when it feels that exciting. Even PAs and interns have reported that it's one of the best experiences they've ever had. I forget if it's his editor, I believe it's his editor, but she reported that she worked with him and she never wants to work with anyone else just because that's how great he is to work with. And she's a phenomenal editor, obviously, if she's working with David Lynch's films, but the fact that she only wants to work with him, I think, is such a testament to what a wonderful person he is. He inspires loyalty in his team, in his actors, and I just think that's absolutely really special and wonderful. Kubrick, on the other hand, was known to be horrid to work with. People have pointed fingers saying that he had a lot to do with Shelley Duvall's kind of spiral into depression and a lot of her stuff. I think that's always debatable, but I have seen footage of the way he treated Shelley on set. It is very sad to see what she went through, and I can understand both perspectives. I can understand as a director he wanted the most powerful performance out of her, but I can also see from an ethical standpoint how pushing your actor to that point is especially these days, would be considered pretty emotionally abusive. So it's very interesting how you have two directors who are probably at the pinnacle of filmmaking, and who even have comparable styles in some regard, but what different people they were, and how David Lynch for me seems fairly close to self-actualization, as I would call it. Of course, he has some dark tendencies. He clearly deals with a lot of existential questioning of things, but I think he's constantly creating, he's constantly inspired, and at the end of the day, I think he's truly authentic to who he is, what he wants, and what he wants to create. And that's a really, really special thing. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want to do more on David Lynch. I'd love to talk more about specific pieces, whether that's Twin Peaks or Mulholland Drive. I think those are probably my personal favorites. But yeah, this was just a fun video to make, and I figured it would be something new and different that we could talk about. Oh, another fun fact is that George Lucas approached David Lynch to direct Return of the Jedi, which would be so weird. And as much as I love Return of the Jedi and Star Wars, I just cannot picture Lynch. And as much as I obviously love David Lynch, I just could not picture Lynch directing any Star Wars film. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you're all doing well. I'll see you in the comment section, hopefully. Let me know what you think. And yeah, I'll talk to you later. May the Force be with you. Bye.